Usually when we talk about a pacifier, we picture, well, a literal baby.
Right. Yeah, like a
Yeah.
literal piece of plastic.
Exactly. We picture that little silicone object that just instantly soothes, instantly quiets everything down, and, distracts from whatever physical discomfort or just emotional chaos is happening in the real world.
You just pop it in, and the crying stops.
Yeah, the crying stops, the nervous system regulates, the whole deal. But then, you look around while you're waiting for a train or sitting in a cafe or lying in bed at midnight, and you realize that we adults, we have our own pacifiers.
Oh, absolutely. We definitely do.
They just happen to be glowing rectangles. So today we are opening up a massive stack of clinical research, behavioral psychology data, and algorithmic analysis. We've got data synthesized from Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, Copilot, Grok, and DeepSeek. And the mission of this deep dive is to answer one really uncomfortable question.
Very uncomfortable.
Is the staggering amount of time we spend on YouTube actually leading to self-fulfillment, or are we just quietly, comfortably starving our own potential?
It really is the absolute definition of psychological muddy waters. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
To even begin to unpack the stakes here, we have to grasp the sheer, terrifying scale of the behavior. We are looking at a 2025 report from Navigate Video, and the baseline metric is that there are over 2.5 billion active users globally.
Which is just a massive chunk of the planet.
It's huge. But the number that should actually make you pause, the one that's really wild, is the consumption rate. Over 1 billion hours of video are watched every single day.
1 billion hours every single day. If you break that down, that is roughly 114,000 years of human attention.
Yeah, it's hard to even conceptualize.
114 millennia of human cognitive energy just funneled into one specific digital architecture every 24 hours. You listening right now, you've probably spent hours on there just this week.
Exactly. And when you are operating at that scale, you are no longer just talking about an entertainment platform. You are talking about a primary foundational vehicle for human socialization, global education, and mass emotional regulation.
Right. It's infrastructure at this point.
Exactly. It's infrastructure that is actively rewiring how the human species pursues meaning.
Which means we can't just write it off as a waste of time. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the darker psychological traps, and believe me, there are plenty in the data we're looking at today.
Oh yeah, there really are.
We need to understand the magnetism. Why is it pulling 114,000 years of attention out of us daily? Like, how does this platform successfully mimic, or in some cases genuinely provide, traditional paths to actual self-fulfillment?
Well, we have to start with the optimistic view, because the utility is undeniable. The clinical consensus across the sociological research we reviewed outlines how this platform serves as a virtually unprecedented global library for educational empowerment.
And we aren't just talking about passive academic knowledge, right? Like just listening to a lecture on macroeconomics.
No, not at all. We are talking about highly practical, immediately applicable skills. We are talking about learning Python or diagnosing a failing transmission in a 2014 Honda or, mastering complex carpentry.
It's the democratization of competence. You used to have to find an apprenticeship or pay a massive tuition fee, or at least hope your dad knew how to fix the sink so he could show you.
Right, exactly.
Now, that barrier to entry is entirely gone. The knowledge is just sitting there waiting for you to press play.
And the psychological mechanism at play there is vital to understanding human fulfillment. When you learn a new physical or cognitive skill and successfully apply it, say you actually disassemble that P-trap under the sink and fix the leak, you are triggering a massive biological reward.
It feels amazing when you actually pull it off.
It does. It directly boosts your baseline confidence. It increases your perceived competence. It gives you a highly concentrated sense of accomplishment.
Because you've actively manipulated your physical reality. Right. You've exerted your will on the world and solved a real problem.
Precisely. Those three elements, confidence, competence, and accomplishment, they're the foundational pillars of self-efficacy.
Yeah.
You have fundamentally altered your environment using knowledge you acquired, which reinforces your sense of agency.
And a high sense of agency is practically synonymous with feeling fulfilled in life.
Exactly. You aren't just a passenger. You are a capable actor in your own existence.
I can completely see how that builds a structural foundation for fulfillment.
Yeah.
But looking through the research stack, it goes way beyond just learning how to change a tire or bake a perfect loaf of sourdough. It touches on profound mental health interventions.
It does. And this is where it gets incredibly impactful. Let's look at a specific, highly revealing piece of data cited in an MDPI published study on the impact of digital media on loneliness and mental health.
Okay, what did that one find?
The researchers referenced a randomized controlled trial focusing specifically on Arab American adolescents, and the behavioral shift they recorded was just remarkable. 65% of the participants stated they would actively consider interacting with a health professional about their mental issues after viewing a targeted, culturally specific, psychoeducational video.
65%. Wow. That is a massive conversion rate for a demographic that might traditionally face severe cultural barriers to talking about mental health.
It is staggering. I mean, think about the physical and psychological barriers to mental health care in the real world. You have the stigma of walking into a therapist's office.
Yeah, sitting in the waiting room.
Right. You have the lack of local access, the financial cost, the intense fear of judgment from your immediate family or community. A simple, accessible video acts as a totally frictionless bridge.
Because it normalizes the experience in absolute privacy. You are sitting alone in your room, maybe feeling entirely alienated from the people immediately around you, and suddenly there is a human face on your screen speaking directly, explicitly to your exact internal, private experience.
And that reduces the perceived isolation almost instantly. It provides psychoeducational content in a highly controlled, safe environment, which significantly reduces the stigma.
It's way better than a pamphlet.
Oh, definitely. It increases mental health literacy in a way that reading a sterile pamphlet in a doctor's waiting room simply does not. It prompts real-world, life-improving action by lowering the initial threshold of fear.
Which naturally brings us to another massive pillar in the sociological data, and that's the concept of finding your tribe. Because it's not just about one-way education, it's about the feeling of existing in a community.
Social connectedness. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, it is a fundamental human survival need. I mean, if an early human was isolated from their tribe, it meant certain death. Our nervous systems are still wired to perceive social isolation as a literal mortal threat.
So when we feel lonely, it isn't just a sad emotion, it's an evolutionary alarm bell going off in our brains.
Exactly. Now bring that into the modern context. The data points us to a fascinating study published in SagePub that looked at marginalized groups, specifically focusing on LGBTQ individuals living in areas where they might face hostility or intense isolation.
Like rural areas or highly conservative towns.
Right. For people living in environments where their identity is structurally rejected, finding niche, hyper-specific communities online acts as a neurological lifeline.
Because they can finally see themselves reflected back. They look around their physical town and see no one like them, which triggers that evolutionary alarm bell. Then they open their laptop, and suddenly there are hundreds of thousands of people who share their exact lived experience.
The SagePub study found that interacting with these specific digital communities actively boosts what sociologists call collective self-esteem. It provides a vital, immediate sense of belonging.
It turns off the alarm bell.
It does. It is an active mechanism for neutralizing that evolutionary panic. You are no longer the only one. You are integrated into a global, visible community. For someone in an isolating physical environment, this is a tremendous, measurable contribution to their overall sense of fulfillment and psychological safety.
Okay, so if we look at this optimistic side, it's like a magical, infinite, global library. You walk in, and the librarians know exactly what you need. It hands you the exact manual to fix your car, the exact psychological framework to understand your anxiety, or the exact community to make you feel fundamentally safe in the world.
It sounds perfect.
It sounds like a utopia,
Yeah.
but there's an enormous gap between knowing something and doing something. And this is where I want to look at the darker implications, because watching a beautifully produced 3-hour documentary on ancient Rome makes me objectively more informed. But does just knowing more things, does acquiring all this information completely passively actually equate to feeling fulfilled?
That is the critical distinction right there. And it is the exact trap the clinical literature warns about. Fulfillment requires significantly more than just the intake of data, what Gemini's analysis calls active engagement with life.
Right, active engagement.
True self-actualization requires active engagement with the friction of real life. Knowing the theory of how to build a dining room table is not the same as the physical, frustrating, splinter-filled process of actually measuring the wood, making a bad cut, buying more wood, and finally standing back to look at a physical object you brought into existence.
It's like running a highly detailed simulation of a marathon in your brain. You can visualize the route, you can study the optimal pacing. Your brain is firing the exact same neurons as if you were running. You might even feel a tiny rush of adrenaline visualizing the finish line, but your physical muscles are actively atrophying on the couch.
Yes, you're getting the software update without ever upgrading the hardware.
Exact.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it. The biological trap is set in the gap between doing and watching. Passive consumption, no matter how profoundly educational or high quality the content is, cannot replace the active steps required for real-world growth.
It just sits there.
Right. If the knowledge isn't translated into physical action, into messy human relationships, into tangible contributions to your environment, it is just potential energy sitting entirely dormant.
So if building that table gives you a profound sense of agency, what exactly is happening to your brain when you just watch someone else build it? I mean, why do we feel so satisfied after a 3-hour binge of productivity videos, even if our own lives are a total mess? We really need to look at the neuroscience of the scroll here.
We definitely do. We have to talk about the illusion of achievement, which is deeply rooted in our neurochemistry. Specifically, we need to look at the function of mirror neurons.
Okay, break that down for me. What are mirror neurons doing when I'm watching a YouTube tutorial?
So, mirror neurons were discovered in primates in the 1990s. Researchers found that when a monkey watched a researcher reach for a peanut, the exact same motor neurons fired in the monkey's brain as if the monkey itself had reached for the peanut.
Really? Just from watching?
Just from watching. Evolutionarily, this is how we learn. It's how early humans learned to nap flint or forage for safe berries without having to individually invent the process through trial and error. We learn by neurologically simulating the actions of others.
Which is brilliant for survival out in the wild. But how does that backfire when we apply it to a glowing rectangle?
Because the platform inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, hijacks this ancient biological hardware. The prevailing research highlights the phenomenon of oddly satisfying videos. You know the ones.
Oh yeah, I've watched way too many of those.
Right. You watch a time-lapse of someone power washing a filthy driveway, or perfectly organizing a chaotic refrigerator, or executing a flawless woodworking joint. Your mirror neurons fire in a way that simulates the experience of completing that task.
So my brain is literally registering that I just power washed the driveway.
To a certain extent, yes. You get the neurochemical reward of productivity. Your brain releases dopamine and serotonin, the neurotransmitters responsible for feelings of reward, pleasure, and task completion satisfaction, without you having to expend a single calorie of physical or mental effort.
Wow.
The platform provides a neurological shortcut to the feeling of achievement.
So what does this all mean? It's worse than a junk food basement. It's like eating a highly engineered synthetic meal. It tastes exactly like a complex, nutritious dinner. It hits every single pleasure center on your tongue. It spikes your blood sugar. Your brain registers extreme satisfaction. But at the end of the day, there are 0 actual vitamins or proteins. You feel completely stuffed, but biologically, you are malnourished.
That is the exact biological mechanism at play. And the profound danger of this nutritional starvation is that it actively dampens your motivation to take the difficult real-world steps needed for growth.
Because why bother, right?
Exactly. Why would you endure the friction, the blistered fingers, and the immense frustration of learning to play the guitar poorly for 6 months when you can just watch a prodigy play it perfectly in 4K resolution and get a highly similar, immediate dopamine hit? The passive consumption actively competes with and often entirely overrides the drive for active engagement.
And the platform's architecture is built to maximize this exact phenomenon. According to the DeepSeek and Perplexity research, the algorithm doesn't care if I actually learn to play the guitar. It cares if I watch someone else play the guitar for 3 hours.
Right. The algorithm is an architecture of pure reinforcement learning. It is not engineered to maximize your self-actualization. It is engineered to maximize watch time, session length, and ad impressions. Period.
How exactly does it do that? Because it feels like magic sometimes. It honestly feels like it reads my mind.
It's not magic. It's exhaustive behavioral tracking. The system measures your micro-hesitations. It measures how long you hover your cursor over a thumbnail before scrolling past it.
Wow, just the hover.
Just the hover. It measures exactly which millisecond you clicked away from a video. It measures whether you watched a video at 1.5 speed or normal speed. It aggregates billions of these data points to build a highly precise, predictive dopamine profile of your specific brain. It learns exactly which sequence of pixels will trigger your mirror neurons and keep you paralyzed on the couch.
It's serving up exactly what will keep me completely sedated, not what will inspire me to get up and live.
It creates a powerful, biologically reinforced feedback loop. You watch a video, you get a temporary hit of simulated achievement. But because it wasn't earned through real effort, the half-life of that dopamine hit is incredibly short.
It wears off super fast.
Very fast. The pleasure fades rapidly, leaving a subtle feeling of emptiness, which prompts you to immediately seek out the next recommended video for relief.
Which brings us to the tipping point. Because when this digital malnourishment compounds, when you are caught in this loop for hours a day, that temporary dopamine hit gives way to serious, measurable psychological damage. We have to transition from the biological trickery into the tangible mental health toll.
The clinical data on this threshold is quite sobering. The research archives in SciTech Daily points to a very specific quantitative tipping point regarding usage. They found that excessive consumption, which they specifically define as using the platform for over 2 hours a day, is strongly consistently linked to higher levels of clinical depression, anxiety, and profound loneliness, especially among users under 29 or anyone with pre-existing vulnerabilities.
Let's pause on that. 2 hours. That is an incredibly low bar.
It really is.
Think about how aggressively easy it is to lose 2 hours. You sit down after dinner, you watch a 30-minute video essay, autoplay queues up 3 more 15-minute videos, and suddenly your evening is just gone. Why is 2 hours the threshold where everything flips from potentially educational to clinically depressive? Is it just because we are physically isolating ourselves in a room for 120 minutes?
Physical isolation is a factor, absolutely. But the core driver is the sustained exposure to what researchers call the comparison trap. To understand this, we need to look at a comprehensive 2025 study archived in PMC, which, for context, is the National Institutes of Health's massive database for peer-reviewed biomedical and life sciences literature. This specific study focused on social media influencers and heavy content consumers.
Okay, what did the NIH data show?
It highlighted a severe evolutionary mismatch. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human brain was built to measure its social status against a local tribe of roughly 150 people. Dunbar's number. You compared your humping skills or your shelter to the guy sitting next to you by the fire.
Right. A manageable, highly localized social hierarchy.
Exactly. But now you open this platform and you are continuously comparing your baseline, unedited reality against a globally filtered elite. The platform naturally surfaces and rewards highly curated, aesthetically perfect, structurally idealized versions of life.
Oh man, the perfectly optimized morning routines.
Right. You are watching people with flawless relationships, massive financial success, and impossibly clean homes.
And you are watching all of this high-definition perfection while sitting in sweatpants on a couch covered in unfolded laundry. The contrast is violently stark.
And that contrast generates severe fear of missing out, or FOMO. Now, FOMO gets thrown around as a casual buzzword, but in clinical psychology, it is an evolutionary distress signal. It is your brain screaming that you are losing your place in the social hierarchy, which, to your primitive brain, equals danger.
Wow, so it literally feels life-threatening to the nervous system.
Yes. The PMC study measurably links this influencer-generated FOMO to significantly lower levels of social, psychological, and financial well-being among young consumers. It breeds deep inadequacy, chronic envy, and ultimately a total collapse of self-esteem.
It is wild to think about the paradox of that. Here is a piece of technology explicitly designed to connect us to the totality of human experience, to show us everything our species is capable of, and the net result is that it makes us feel entirely inadequate and more isolated than before we bought the device. If it makes us feel this bad, why do we keep opening the app?
Because of the psychology of avoidance. The Claude analysis of the clinical consensus points out that mindless scrolling is rarely about seeking entertainment. It is primarily a coping mechanism for distress tolerance. We use the infinite scroll as a digital anesthetic to numb ourselves against the friction of reality.
So if I have a massive project due at work and I feel a spike of cortisol and anxiety about it, instead of sitting with that discomfort and starting the project, I open up a video about a guy building a cabin in the woods.
Exactly. It's an instant escape hatch from negative affect. But the insidious part of this avoidance loop is that it radically widens the gap between a user's conscious intentions and their actual behavioral habits. You intend to work on your career, you feel anxious, you use the platform to soothe the anxiety, and then you feel immense guilt and shame for wasting 2 hours.
And what do we do when we feel shame? We look for a pacifier to soothe it.
Precisely. The gap between who you want to be and what you are actually doing grows wider, generating intense cognitive dissonance. This creates more baseline anxiety, which drives you right back into the arms of the algorithm to soothe the very anxiety the algorithm helped create. It is a perfectly closed, vicious cycle.
But I want to explore another layer here because I don't think it's just about escaping into perfectly clean houses or avoiding our to-do lists. It's much more human than that. We are fundamentally looking for connection. And that brings us to one of the strangest, most complex psychological phenomena of the modern internet.
The parasocial relationship.
Yes.
This is undoubtedly the deepest, most resilient emotional hook of the entire architecture. We've talked extensively about the algorithm, the tracking, the dopamine profile. But the human faces on the screen, the creators looking directly into the camera lens, using conversational language, speaking as if they are alone in a room with you, that is what permanently anchors users to the platform. It creates a highly complex, emotionally profound substitute for real-world intimacy.
It really does. I mean, you can watch a creator's vlog every week for 4 years. You literally watch them age. You know their dog's name. You know their specific coffee order. You know the layout of their apartment. You know the intricacies of their childhood trauma because they did a whole storytime video about it. Your brain genuinely categorizes them as a close friend.
But it is the definition of a parasocial or one-sided bond. The user invests massive amounts of emotional energy, time, and loyalty, while the creator is entirely completely oblivious to the user's individual existence. Now, the sociological research is very nuanced here. For individuals who are suffering from severe social isolation or crippling social anxiety, these parasocial bonds are not entirely negative. They can actually fulfill core emotional needs and aid significantly in nervous system regulation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is exactly where I want to push back on the prevailing narrative that screen time is purely bad. If someone is deeply, profoundly lonely, maybe they live in a rural area, maybe they have a severe physical disability that keeps them homebound, or maybe they just have crippling social anxiety, isn't a parasocial relationship objectively better than absolutely no relationship at all?
That's a very fair question.
If it helps them regulate their panic attacks and feel a sense of warmth, we can't just clinically judge it as fake or unfulfilling, right?
What's fascinating here is that we really can't look at this in black and white. You are absolutely right that it can serve as a lifeline. The data from various sociological reviews, including analyses from Grift News and PMC, explicitly acknowledge that these one-sided interactions do enhance a baseline sense of connectedness.
So they do work on some level.
They do. They can be a vital emotional salve. They have undeniable short-term utility for distress tolerance.
So where does it become a trap? Because I hear a big but in your voice.
It becomes a trap when it transitions from a temporary salve into a permanent substitute. Biologically and psychologically, it is a dead end. While parasocial relationships provide immediate comfort, relying on them as your primary source of social interaction actively stunts emotional growth and exacerbates a profound detachment from the real world.
Why does it stunt growth? If I feel connected, aren't I growing?
Because true growth requires the friction of reciprocity. In a real physical friendship, you are inevitably challenged. You have to compromise on where to eat. You have to sit and listen to their problems when you're really tired. You have to navigate the discomfort of an argument and the vulnerability of an apology.
Right. A YouTube creator is never going to text you at 2 a.m. asking you to drive them to the airport. They are never going to call you out when you're being selfish. They demand absolutely nothing from you.
Exactly. Parasocial bonds are intimacy entirely stripped of risk. They're a perfectly controlled environment. And while that feels incredibly safe, it removes the very friction that forces a human being to mature, to develop empathy, and to self-actualize. Furthermore, as the DeepSeek data points out, there is a severe danger in tying your intrinsic self-worth to these external, one-sided communities.
How?
Well, if your sense of belonging is tied up in the external validation of a comment section, or the tribalism of defending a creator in some online drama, your emotional stability is entirely at the mercy of the algorithm and fleeting viral trends. It is an illusion of community without any of the structural support of a real one.
Intimacy without risk. That is a terrifyingly appealing concept for a tired brain. So if we pull all the way back, we are looking at a platform that is simultaneously an absolute minefield. It is packed with algorithmic dopamine traps, FOMO-inducing evolutionary mismatches, and risk-free pseudo-relationships that stunt our emotional growth.
Yeah.
But it is also a miraculous, globally accessible library of life-changing knowledge, genuine skill building, and critical marginalized community support. If a listener wants the library but wants to avoid the junk food basement, how on earth do they navigate this? What is the actual clinical prescription here?
The synthesis of all these psychological frameworks points to one single overriding strategy. The radical cultivation of intentionality. You have to aggressively reclaim your cognitive agency. We are moving from diagnosing the algorithmic problem to building a practical defensive framework.
Mhm.
And the core thesis from sources like DeepSeek and Copilot is this: YouTube is not a lifestyle. It is a tool.
Just a tool.
It is morally and psychologically neutral. Its impact on your fulfillment depends entirely, 100%, on the explicit intention you bring to the search bar.
It is exactly like a hammer. You can use a hammer to frame a house and build shelter for your family, or you can use it to completely smash your own thumb. The hammer doesn't care. It's just a multiplier of your intent.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy. So the first step in this framework is conscious curation. The clinical advice emphasizes the absolute necessity of actively choosing your content environment rather than passively defaulting to the algorithm's recommendations. You have to wrestle the steering wheel away from the autoplay feature.
What does conscious curation look like on a Tuesday night when I'm just exhausted?
It requires upfront work. It looks like treating your subscription feed like a highly exclusive VIP list. For example, instead of just opening the homepage and letting the algorithm feed you whatever generates the most outrage or fast-paced dopamine, you actively seek out curated lists.
Like finding trusted sources beforehand.
Right. You might search for an article like Starter Stories' 18 Best Psychology YouTube Channels in 2025 and intentionally subscribe to creators who focus purely on slow-paced personal growth, long-form education, and positive mental health. You ruthlessly unsubscribe from channels that trigger your FOMO or rely on hyperfast editing to hold your attention. You engineer your feed so that it forcefully aligns with your long-term values, not your short-term biological impulses.
You have to become the ruthless editor-in-chief of your own attention.
I love that concept, and I want to pause and bring this directly to you, the listener. Think about this tonight. Open your app and look at your subscription feed. Just scroll through it. Does that list of faces and topics reflect the person you genuinely want to become in 5 years? Or does it just perfectly reflect the person you are when you're exhausted, emotionally depleted, and looking to numb out at 11 p.m.? Because those are often two vastly different people.
That is the ultimate diagnostic question for your digital environment. And once you have aggressively curated that feed, the second pillar, which Copilot really highlights, is what researchers call reflective viewing. This is how you transform that passive neurological consumption into an active, friction-filled process. The rule is simple. You don't just watch a thought-provoking hour-long video and then immediately let the app seamlessly transition you into the next one. You must manufacture a pause.
You have to break the reinforcement loop. How do we do that practically? You introduce the See-Do-Teach framework, or some variation of it. You pair the digital input with an immediate, physical, real-world action. If you watch a documentary on Stoic philosophy, you don't watch another one. You close the laptop, pull out a physical notebook, and journal for 10 minutes about how you can apply those concepts to the argument you had with your boss today. Or you call a friend and discuss the concepts, forcing your brain to synthesize and articulate the information verbally.
Or if you watch the coding tutorial, you immediately write the code. If you watch the woodworking video, you go out to the garage and make a cut. You are literally forcing the passive digital potential energy into kinetic physical output.
Precisely. You must demand a return on investment for your attention. And that brings us to the third and final pillar, which Claude's analysis heavily focuses on: balance and boundaries. The psychological consensus is absolute on this point. This platform, and digital media in general, works best when it is strictly a supplementary element in a fulfilling life, never the primary source of meaning. It's designed to complement your reality, not serve as a substitute for it.
Which means confronting that terrifying 2-hour threshold we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Setting hard, inviolable screen time boundaries is non-negotiable if you want to protect your baseline mental health from the comparison trap and the dopamine drain. You have to decide, in an environment of complete cognitive sobriety like first thing in the morning, exactly how much of your finite time on this earth you are willing to trade to this platform today. And then you use app timers or physical friction to enforce it.
It really all boils down to cultivating a habit of constant, rigorous self-interrogation, doesn't it? Before you click and after you watch, you have to ask yourself, did this video actually enrich my life or did it just successfully distract me from it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the trajectory of human history, true, deep self-actualization has never once come from passively watching other people live. It has always required the intense friction of setting your own goals, building your own messy, complicated, real-life relationships, and contributing your specific unique energy to a community or a project larger than yourself. This platform can absolutely support that journey. It can hand you the map, it can give you the compass, and it can teach you how to read the terrain. But it fundamentally cannot walk the path for you.
It is the map, not the destination.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense amount of psychological terrain today. We started by looking at the incredible, genuinely massive potential of this global learning library. The unprecedented ability to master any skill, to bridge the gap to mental health resources, and to find life-saving peer support that neutralizes our evolutionary fear of isolation. But we also mapped out the severe biological traps. We looked at how mirror neurons trick us into an illusion of achievement, keeping us paralyzed and malnourished on the couch. We dissected the clinical dangers of the 2-hour threshold, the evolutionary mismatch of the FOMO comparison trap, and the comforting but ultimately stunting reality of one-sided parasocial friendships.
And we arrived at the absolute necessity of intentional curation. The mandatory requirement of cultivating your own cognitive agency against a billion-dollar algorithm explicitly designed to capture and hold it.
I want to take a second to acknowledge the time you, the listener, have spent with us on this deep dive. The very fact that you are engaging with this kind of long-form, rigorous, analytical content proves that you already have the desire for intentional, active learning. You are already demonstrating the agency required to step away from the digital pacifier and utilize the tools that actually build a fulfilling life.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to ponder tonight, building on everything we've discussed about the architecture of these algorithmic platforms. We know right now that genuine fulfillment requires the friction of active, real-world engagement, and that the platform currently offers a highly compelling, but ultimately hollow, passive simulation of that engagement. But think about the accelerating trajectory of the technology. As recommendation algorithms become exponentially more sophisticated, they won't just predict what thumbnail you'll click. They will predict your exact, nuanced psychological deficits at any given millisecond. They will provide a perfectly tailored, endlessly stimulating, flawlessly empathetic stream of educational and emotional content designed specifically to regulate your unique nervous system. If the simulation fulfillment becomes entirely indistinguishable from the neurochemical reality, will we eventually lose the biological ability to tell the difference between feeling truly, deeply fulfilled by a life well lived and simply being perfectly, flawlessly entertained until we die?
That is a profoundly unsettling thought, and honestly, maybe that specific flavor of discomfort is exactly the kind of friction we need to stay awake in this digital age. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We strongly encourage you to close this app right now, physically step away from the glowing screen, take all this knowledge, and go engage with the messy, frustrating, beautiful, real world. Stay intensely curious, and remember, the real library is out there waiting for you, and the best part is there is no algorithm tracking your footsteps. We will catch you next time.